welcome to a special report on the unsolved crimes in California over the past decade. First up, we'll discuss the criminal commonly referred to as the Visalia ransacker, who from 1974 to 1975 commit over 100 burglaries, all of which share the same odd trait. In each of these burglaries, small items were stolen while large and valuable items were left behind. There is speculation that these burglaries may also be linked to a murder in that area. Next up, we have the East Area Rapist, who operated from 1976 to 1979 in the Sacramento area, often targeting women who lived alone and lived near a major roadway or highway. These rapes seem to be well thought out, as the rapist chose easy targets with an easy escape route. Reports say that the man is believed to stalk his victims before committing these horrendous acts, and has even gone as far as to break in beforehand to unload any of their firearms and leave behind ropes to bind them with later that night. The original Night Stalker is the next unsolved crime on our list, with crimes beginning in 1979 and accounting for the murder of at least 10 people. Victims have claimed that surrounding the time of their attacks, they received multiple wrong number phone calls, which they believe were made by the original Night Stalker. If you have any information regarding any of these burglaries, rapes, or murders, please contact your local sheriff's office. At this time, we believe that each of these criminals are still in the California area and they are thought to be armed and dangerous. If you witness any suspicious activity or have any leads, please don't hesitate to call. It could save a life. Next up, we are going to cut to Dr. Amanda Clark, a psychoanalyst who's going to assess the psychology she believes is behind each of the criminals' actions.
Thank you, Lexi. Let's look at some similarities between these criminals. There are two different types of serial killers that seem to fit the profile of these offenders. The first type is known as a thrill seeker. Thrill seekers love to outsmart authorities, which can be shown by the East Area Rapist calling the police before attacking their next victim. The original Night Stalker typically raped and killed their victims, which is also indicative of a thrill seeker. The second type of serial killer thrives off of power and control. Instead of stealing items of value, the Visalia ransacker preferred to rearrange items in the victim's home and go through women's underwear. This is a type of psychological torture. The East Area Rapist went from originally attacking single women and mothers to attacking couples. He forces a female to tie her male counterpart up. The perpetrator then puts plates on the male's back and claims that if he hears the plates rattle, he will kill everyone in the house. Then he proceeds to rape the female. After raping the female, the East Area Rapist stays in the home for several hours, eating the victim's food and making continuous threats. In 1982, the East Area Rapist called one of his previous victims, threatening to attack her again. These mechanisms of power and control are a type of psychological warfare for these victims. What can motivate these criminals to complete these vicious crimes? It's safe to say that these crimes are highly organized. The East Area Rapist tends to break into houses prior to the night of attack to leave a door or window unlocked and ligatures to tie victims up. The rapist would search the home for firearms, making sure to unload them. He also would call his victims months in advance, pretending to have the wrong number to learn these innocent people's daily routine. Each of these criminals also wears gloves in order to prevent leaving behind any traces of their appearance. However, the most astonishing connection about these criminals is that the East Area Rapist and the original Night Stalker both have used unique knots to tie up these victims. So now I encourage the authorities to consider this. Are these criminals connected? There are multiple similarities that could perhaps even insinuate that these perpetrators are the same person. There's obviously still a lot of research that needs to be done, but one thing is for certain. This criminal or criminals are psychopaths and will not stop until found. Thank you.
Breaking news. The Golden State Killer, also known as the East Area Rapist, the original Night Stalker, and the Visalia ransacker, has finally been identified as 74-year-old Joseph James DeAngelo, a former police officer. He was arrested in 2018 in a Sacramento suburb after a new DNA technique was used to identify him. This new DNA technique collects DNA at crime scenes and runs it through a genealogy database to identify possible relatives of the suspect. This was the first public arrest to use genetic genealogy. On June 29, 2020, DeAngelo pleaded guilty to 13 counts of first-degree murder. The plea deal also required DeAngelo to admit to the other uncharged acts. According to prosecutors, DeAngelo admitted to committing crimes against 87 victims at 53 different crime scenes from 1975 to 1986. However, due to the statute of limitation, DeAngelo was only charged with 50 accounts of rape and the murder of 13 individuals. Mr. DeAngelo was sentenced to 11 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole for the 13 murders, an additional consecutive life term for 13 kidnappings, plus 8 years for weapon charges. Ultimately, Mr. DeAngelo will meet his death behind the walls of a state penitentiary. His trial took place in the middle of a global pandemic. To accommodate the large number of victims while safely following CDC social distancing guidelines, the trial took place in a large Sacramento State University ballroom. During his trial, more than 45 victims and family members testified over a period of 3 days to the pain and anger that DeAngelo caused them. After all the statements were made, DeAngelo rose out of his wheelchair and removed his mask to say, "I've listened to all your statements, each one of them, and I'm truly sorry to everyone that I have hurt." Now, here's Dr. Courtney with some insight to the infamous Golden Gate Killer.
We now know that the infamous Golden State Killer is Joseph DeAngelo, and a little insight into his life can show you how this monster came to be. Joseph experienced multiple traumas as a child. His father was in the military, and there are multiple reports of him being abusive to his mother and Joseph. Joseph's mother was said to be overbearing, domineering, and also abusive. When Joseph and his family were stationed in Germany, Joseph witnessed his sister, who was 7 years of age at the time, being raped by 2 airmen. His father instructed the family to never speak of the event. Because of this upbringing, Joseph was desensitized to this type of sexual deviance and violence. This likely sparked his obsession with sexual sadism. Adults who commit the types of crimes Joseph did were often victims of child abuse themselves. As a teenager, Joseph was caught stealing and harming animals. These actions point to possible escalation of violence in adulthood. After high school, Joseph joined the Navy, which fits the profile of someone who is very meticulous in their actions, as well as has a knowledge of intricate knots. The knots used to tie up his victims was a pattern that followed through each of his crimes. After his experience in the military, Joseph received a bachelor's degree in criminal justice and went on to join the police force. This knowledge obtained through his police career is likely how he got away with his crimes for so long. He knew how to make a strategic plan to avoid being caught. Joseph was clearly obsessed with the sexual arousal he received from stalking and torturing women. He elicited behaviors known as telephone scatologia, where he would call the victims or potential victims on the phone and taunt them. He also expressed paraphilic behaviors of voyeurism and sexual sadism. His whole life revolved around seeking out his next thrill, and we see the crimes escalate to keep him satisfied. The majority of sexual killers express psychopathy, as Joseph did. This includes pathological lying, a grandiose sense of self, and a lack of empathy, amongst other things. In the early 70s, Joseph was engaged to a woman who later broke off the engagement after realizing his violent tendencies. This likely enraged Joseph. He desired to be in control. One of his victims in 1977 was a young girl who had been very interested in his crimes previously. The young girl got the sense that he desired control and terror over the act of violence itself, so she was able to outsmart him. When he would threaten to kill her, she'd simply say, "I don't care." This defiance angered him because he was not able to take the control that he desired. His obsession with sexual sadism, his hatred for women, his desire for power and control, his arousal by the thrill, these drove the killer that we now know as Joseph DeAngelo.